So there's a bit of an introduction that I do post show, but Doug, I want to thank you very much for doing this. Usually, my first thing I would do is offer someone a drink, but as we're 300 kilometers away from each other, I won't be doing that. But I have to get this out of the way. How are you doing through this whole COVID-19 pandemic?
Uh, I'm doing all right. I have sons who are 11 and 14, and they're doing schooling now, of course, remotely. And I used to be a junior high teacher, so I'm perfectly primed to make sure they're getting their work done, and they're not having probably as much fun as other kids are, whose parents aren't quite sure exactly how to make sure they stay up to date. And my wife still is going to work. She works in a clinic and medically necessary. So it's a little stressful knowing the stuff that she goes in and sees and comes home every day. But I mean, we're thoroughly sterilizing everything all the time and staying well. And of course, I work from home, so I'm just not traveling around North America speaking, which I forgot. I sometimes got frustrated with how much I traveled, and now I kind of miss heading out once in a while. But we're doing as well as can be expected and as well as anybody else, just staying home and stopping the spread.
Well, that's great to hear. So actually, I'm gonna actually ask you to put your headphones on because I can hear myself and it's reverb, like the echo is there. If that's okay,
Yeah, absolutely.
we'll just give you a second here. Testing 1, 2, 3.
I will just have to.
Connect the Bluetooth.
It only connects to two, and I need to deliberately connect. Uh, Pick this one over other ones.
Can you hear me?
2 secs.
No worries.
I forgot to. There we go.
So can you hear me now?
You bet.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Because just the echo was I was hearing it. So I guess my first question, I ask this to everyone I talk to, whether it be an author, academics, whether it be politicians, former politicians, or entrepreneurs like yourself. Where does your passion to help others come from?
Uh, I That's a good question. It's always been there. I don't know. I guess I have a bit of a personality for it. I always had empathy for the situation other people were in and the pain that they were in and the challenges that they had. And maybe it's because, well, not to get too personal, but because I had a lot of it myself. When I was younger, a lot younger, I got picked on and bullied and probably suffered a little bit from um, anxiety. And I don't know. So every time I could feel somebody else was stressed or in pain, I wanted to help. And I actually prefer helping people more than just about anything else. If um, Even with this business that I do, most people that we do the projects for say it's more like a social enterprise. We don't make a lot of money, but we do try and make the communities better. I think building communities is the most important job on earth. So
And did your parents instill that upon you as well?
uh, yeah, I mean they were always helped neighbors and helped friends and um, uh, you know whenever anybody was in need, they were one of the first ones there. And growing up in a small town, I think maybe helped too, because you'd see at a not just at a funeral with a town of 1,200 people, where 400 people would show up in empathy and sympathy for what was going on. But I mean, then you go home and my mom would make 5 days worth of meals for the family while they're going through grieving, and 200 people did the same thing. I mean, they'd have years worth of food. We always were there. That's what being part of a community is. So, I mean, I suppose I couldn't really preach that building communities is the most important job on earth if I didn't participate and have empathy for the people in the communities I'm in. So.
And you participated in a public fashion at a young age, at 29, being one of the youngest elected MLAs in the province at the time. In 2002, you ran for a by-election. What was that like? As a 29-year-old, I didn't even know where I was going. So how did you know that you wanted to get into politics and give back in that sense?
Oh, well, let's not make the presumption I knew what I was doing. I mean, I actually, I was frankly, every time I've done something like that, it's because I've been in a spot in my life where things have been really hard and really challenging. And my mom always said to me, when you're facing challenges and you're down, you're depressed, you're frustrated, you're focused on yourself, the best way to get out of that slump is to go help somebody else. And so go do something that's meaningful. And so I actually had been married for almost a whole year. I was married once before, and it didn't work out from day one. It was a horrible experience. We were both from different places with different understandings. And so I came home one day and everything was gone. Every single thing in my house. Wow. I had one fork, one spoon, one plate, an old black and white TV, and one chair. And I was shocked and surprised and dismayed and depressed. And in the meantime, I was a junior high teacher and just kept focusing on what I was doing. And then our member of the Legislative Assembly resigned in the middle of the term, or towards the end of the term. I think there was a little over a year left. And I thought, I want to go help. I want to do something. I had been volunteering in politics for a long time before that. So I got up at 4 a.m. The constituency was 3 hours wide and 2 hours north and south. So I went to all of the 32 communities. I'd get up at 4 a.m. and drive to meet at a coffee shop and then go back into school at 7:30. And after I'd go do the same thing. And no one thought I was going to win because I was so young. I mean, I was 29, but I looked like I was 17.
Was it a contested nomination?
Oh yeah, it was one of those circumstances where whoever won the nomination was bound to be the MLA. So there were 6 people that ran for the nomination, and only 3 different parties in the actual proper election, because they knew who would win. So it was heavily contested, and we came from the least populated region in the corner of the constituency. But like I said, no one thought I would win, but I did.
So winning must have put you on a different path than you originally planned for your life. So take me through that aspect of being elected and working with the government of the time, Ralph Klein, to better your community. And what did you bring from your background to ensure that how you were raised and how you wanted to help people, you did while as an elected MLA?
Well, actually, I ran not telling people, I'm going to go, be an effective voice and I'm going to be a cabinet minister. And, everyone had their pitches. Mine was, I'm going to go advocate for our rural communities. I said over and over again in every presentation speech that I did that we had an agriculture policy that helped make the rural regions stronger, but we never really had a rural community policy, and we needed one. That's was the foundation of why I ran. And so I got elected, and the very first job I got from the deputy premier was to go write a rural development strategy. And for 13 years as an MLA through 4 terms, everything I did was focused on community building, and especially for our small towns. So I think that's and I actually resigned so I could go back to community building.
Well, and that's an area that I wanted to talk about, because I'm not sure if you remember this, but I actually interviewed you when you resigned. And I remember Richard Starkey actually told me to call you because at that time you had just broken your leg, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
From a skiing accident?
Yeah, water skiing. Well, kind of. Frankly, it was a wakeboarding accident in BC, and to this day they have no idea. I shattered my femur.
Oh wow.
And I don't wakeboard. I don't want anyone to get the impression I was doing any fancy maneuvers. I'd never done it before, and my wife said, no, my son tried it, my oldest, and was frustrated he couldn't do it, and said it looks so easy because my brother-in-law was doing it, and my wife looked at me and said, why don't you try it? And then he'll at least realize, well, if Dad can't do it, it must be hard. And so I tried 3 times and couldn't get up, and my nephew said, try one more time. And somehow I was pulling, and boom, I just felt like it smashed into my leg. And everyone laughs and jokes that Ogo Pogo gave me a headbutt, but shattered about 2-3 inches of my femur and cracked it from the knee to the hip, and they put a titanium rod in, and that was in July. And then I didn't resign until January, but I knew I wasn't. I knew in the caucus meeting in November, I was finally out of the wheelchair, and I was on crutches and then a cane, and went into the caucus meeting, and it was the same caucus meeting when the Wild Rose Party was invited to come in, and they were going to join, and I thought, I gotta go. And I told the premier I was leaving, and I didn't resign until January officially because they asked me not to, just till they could get organized. But I had literally said I will not be in the next caucus meeting, and that was at the end of January, so I resigned 2 days before.
Wow. Going back to your time as MLA, you were appointed Minister of Municipal Affairs. I think that's a happy appointment for you because of your activities now. What was that process like of being appointed Minister of Municipal Affairs? Especially from a rural community. Rural riding, I should say.
Well, you know what? It was interesting because I had run to be premier and lost. And so the person who won appointed me to be Minister of Municipal Affairs because of my focus on communities. And I'll still, the very first phone call summed it up to me. It was an interview, and they said, so now that you're Minister of Municipal Affairs, you're going to implement everything you wrote in your book. And I wrote a book, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. And I thought, you have not read the book, because I didn't have, a list of just, this is the prescription to make things go away. And I use that phrase a lot. We're sort of in a world now where we don't feel well and we go get a prescription and it goes away. And even with our communities, our rural communities, and their economic strategies, their economic plans, they're shrinking populations, they're shrinking main streets, they're deteriorating infrastructure. They think there's just some prescription to make it all better, and it's not. Every community needs to take ownership and decide what's going to make them unique. So I faced a bit of a challenge because everyone thought, oh, this is the community guy. He's going to solve it all for us. And yet the very first line I wrote in the rural development strategy I wrote for the province, and what I said in the book, is that the province can't fix it for you. We can be there to help, but you have to decide you want to do something to make your community successful. And it means evolving and realizing that things are changing and being prepared to adapt. Otherwise you die.
And that's a jumping off point of the reason why I wanted to talk to you, because I'm sitting down with mayors, reeves, councillors from across Alberta and actually around the country right now, because I'm speaking to 2 councillors from Ontario in the next 2 weeks. What is the biggest obstacle facing smaller communities and even urban communities today, in your opinion?
Oh, you know what? I'm glad you asked that question, because they're all facing obstacles. There was just a great column earlier this week or last week in the New York Times about how people are moving out of New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles, but they're also moving out of small towns. Where are they going and why? And I think the biggest challenge that communities are facing is the failure in their ability to realize what's coming and how the world is changing. They still try and do things the way they did 30 years ago. And it's not going to work. It's not what millennials are looking for. It's not what Generation Z is looking for, the older ones that are entering the economy and looking at homes and stuff. It's not even what mine and your generation want necessarily anymore, because we've evolved from what we were expected we were supposed to life was going to be like when we were in our 20s to what it's really like when we're in our 40s, and what we really want to spend the next 30 years, God willing, doing. So I mean, without changing that mindset, there are most communities around North America think their path to growth is to build a new subdivision. So they're building these traditional homes with 3 or 4 bedrooms and 2 or 3 bathrooms and a 2-car garage in a subdivision. Now that's about housing. That's not about community, and that's not about neighborhoods. But what people want more and more is to be part of a real community, especially when the next generation doesn't work nearly as much in an office as they used to. They work online, like we're doing right now. So when you spend 40 hours a week working online, looking at a computer screen, you don't want a cocoon in the basement or in the backyard. You want a front porch, and you want a main street, and you want to go to the yoga studio and a craft beer market and a coffee shop that's really a third place. Yet we're not building neighborhoods, we're still building subdivisions. And the communities that are growing and prospering are focusing on building neighborhoods. That's why those people are moving from super small towns and super big cities into places like Boise, Idaho, where they can get all of the services they want, but they're not in a giant city and they're not in a small town. They're in a real authentic community and real neighborhoods.
So without giving up too much details, because I know it's in the book, how do you build a neighborhood? How would you build a neighborhood? Is it because in your book you talk about how we need to focus on seniors, how kids, youth is an area that we have to focus on as well, but also diversifying the economy as well without attracting businesses because it could kill your community. So how would you build a neighborhood? As someone who is a advocate for communities, how would you build a neighborhood?
Well, when the communities we work in now that bring us into contract, we go in and we do an assessment, and most of them their downtown is suffering, their downtown businesses, and the reason why they're suffering is because they're still focused on attracting businesses that are commodity based, right? Buying jeans, but you can buy jeans online, and most of the next generation does. So again, 30 years ago, somehow we got this mindset that downtown was about businesses, and yet it was always about socialization. Businesses located there because of the socialization. So 30 years ago, I mean, I had a business on the main floor, and people lived on the second floor above the business. And so there were vehicles on Main Street. There were people downtown. After work closed, even at 5 o'clock, the restaurants were still open because there were people there, and you'd go down and you'd eat and people would socialize. And then we built these subdivisions, and people moved out to the subdivisions. And at 5 o'clock, they're like, well, I don't want to go back into town to eat. So nobody went. Restaurants closed. Nobody lives downtown. The main streets are vacant. So if you want to start to rebuild your community, build a neighborhood, start with the downtown core and reintroduce housing and focus on businesses that are around socialization and services. So you get action and activity that makes the businesses that are there more viable, but it brings people back downtown. And that's the very first neighborhood you should focus on is your downtown core.
So, but okay, I understand that, but how do you attract businesses without telling businesses not to come? Because if you say we're a business-friendly community, we want businesses to come to our downtown core. If 4 pizza shops open up in the downtown core, you can't stop that, right? So how do you diversify your economy while trying to make that neighborhood? Because if you're saying we need to make sure that youth have their, they can buy their jeans online. If a jeans store wants to open up in my downtown core in a small rural neighborhood, why stop that? Why would we be looking at not diversifying our economy and not being the heavy-handed government and saying, no, you can't come in. We only want these type of shops.
No, I think sorry, Chris. I think maybe I didn't clarify enough because I'm not saying stop them from coming in.
Okay.
Absolutely. If they want to come in, that's the entrepreneurial spirit. Let them make a go of it.
Yeah.
Except actively when we're trying to build a community. I mean, you can Google it online. There's great resources that are the top 80 businesses every community should have that everyone needs. We still think that our downtowns need to be commodity based. And if anything, it's not about preventing pizza shops from opening. It's about also having, a dental office and a yoga studio and more diversity down there. We actually, there's some communities that have bylaws that prevent those services and social businesses from opening on Main Street, and that needs to stop. You need a diversity of businesses to make it a full community. So, no, and you know what? Actually, we worked in one community. They have 3 brew pubs on Main Street. And I mean, it's a decent sized community. And they said, you know what, we're going to pass a bylaw that no more brew pubs are allowed on Main Street. And I said, why would you do that? And they said, well, because it's going to make them all unviable and they'll all go broke. And all I do is look at them and smile and say, yeah, that's what they did in Nashville. They said only 3 live music pubs. That's all we're going to be able to accept. No, are you kidding? You should. If there's 10 on there, it becomes a focal point, and people will come to do a brew pub tour. Why would you stop it? What you need is more social activity related businesses on Main Street and housing people down.
So how do you build housing when there's already established buildings there? Because in the community that I work for, it's a small northern community. It has an established storefront in the downtown core. There is not a residential area in the downtown core. So how do you do that? How do you make that transition? And with the times that we're in right now, developers are not coming to the rural communities. They're staying into the urban centers. So how do you attract developers to the smaller communities to make it viable, to make the downtown core have more housing?
Oh, that's such a great question, and there's so much that can be done. We were in a smaller community in North Dakota, and they had the same question: what do we do? So they redesigned Main Street to be more curb outs and wider sidewalks, and they focused on bringing activities downtown so that there were constantly people there. And the next thing you knew, because they had a few vacant places on Main Street, the next thing that happened was that a developer from Chicago came up and bought 3 of those vacant buildings and built a 5-story. The main floor was commercial businesses. The next floor was offices, and the top 3 floors are residential, with some green space actually built in on the 4th floor and an open roof concept. And it was sold out before they finished building it. And the reason why was because there was more activity downtown and there was the opportunity for investment. But it doesn't have to be right on Main Street. It can be 1 block off. We worked in another community that is still considering how they're going to move forward, because we just finished with them. But they have these backyards off of Main Street that are twice as wide as Main Street. There's room to sub-fill in housing, and they're considering doing it. But they have the same problem. They're outside of a city of about 120,000 people, and they're thinking people want to move out of there, but we're not sure if we can get developers there. So what they're going to do, because here in Alberta, it was probably the last initiative I did as a Minister of Municipal Affairs with the rest of cabinet, was change legislation so that a municipality could own a corporation that was utility focused, so deliver garbage pickup or water or sewer or power. But now they have the ability to create a development corporation where they can actually build up equity, partner with private developers. And their notion is that developers aren't probably going to come here and do it themselves yet. But if we're not going to own it and take responsibility and start the initiative, why would they have faith in us if we don't have faith in ourselves? So they're going to create a development corporation, buy up some of that vacant space, and then partner with the private sector, and they're maybe like a brew pub. And it could generate revenue for that municipal corporation, which can pay dividends to the municipality. But it also leads to improved tax revenue for the community, because there's new businesses on Main Street, new housing on Main Street. So there are tools in the toolbox to do that.
Okay, in a perfect world, that would be great. But we have hundreds of communities across Alberta. We have hundreds of rural communities across Alberta, thousands if possible, and around the world. How do you stand out, though? How do you stand out for developers to say, you know what, this is the community I want to actually build in. This is the community. Because you look at municipalities across, they are all vying for the exact same thing right now.
That's exactly the problem. They're all vying for the same thing. I mean, we did research starting on the West Coast across North America and stopped at about the Manitoba borderline all the way down through Texas. And we stopped because 54% of the communities, 54%, wow, 1 out of every 2, had a slogan that said something like the best place to work, live, and raise a family. Well, yay for competition. That's like Apple saying, hey, our phone is great. And Microsoft saying our phone was great too. And Google saying our phone's great. And Samsung, yay. It's what differentiates you that makes you better. And saying you're the best place to work, live, and raise a family is a lie. There isn't a community in the world that is perfect. What makes your community grow is finding out what makes you unique. And every single community has some unique offering. Now, I know what you're going to say, but there are still, in Alberta, 349 communities. How do they all differentiate themselves? Don't worry. 200, 300 of them aren't going to bother with the energy it requires or the investment it requires to find that. It's like saying, well, what if every company in the world made a cell phone? Don't worry about it. To be a handful that are going to take the initiative, and I guarantee you every single one of those can find some way to make themselves unique. And in fact, every single client we've worked with, we've found something that makes them unique and competitive. And usually the council and the Chamber of Commerce and the economic development officers and authority are all saying, oh, wow, we do have a value proposition to differentiate us from everybody else.
Is that the biggest obstacle that communities have to overcome right now to attract businesses, to attract the builders to come to their community? Because when I speak to municipalities, and I've spoken to mayors, their biggest thing is, how do we make our town more business friendly? How do we open up our land use bylaw to ensure that businesses can come in and develop no matter what they are, no matter what they want? We want them to come here, so we will roll out the red carpet for them to let them come in. Is it actually more branding yourself to attract it and not just giving away the kitchen sink to attract them?
Definitely. I mean, giving away the kitchen sink. Look, let's back up for a second. Okay. I think that communities, whenever we write a project, work on a project, I tell communities, I don't use the phrase what for their community because it's not a thing to me. I use who, because I think a community has a personality and uniqueness just like every single individual does. And every single individual finds their own path. And I think every community needs to do that too. But you would never advise a person to say, hey, your resume should say nothing about who you are, nothing about what you've done, nothing about where you're going, nothing about what you're interested in. Just throw it up on the wall and see who hires you. That's not a good strategy. You need to determine your own path and decide what you want to be. And then, because then you say yes to the right things and you say no to the things that don't fit with you. And communities are the same way. Right now, they're basically saying, we're open for anything. God, please come here. And if I was in business and looking at that, I'd say, no, thanks. You have no idea where you're going or what you're going to do. This week, you're happy I open a business, and next week, you're like, damn, you're located by the wrong one. We got to do something. It's chaos. Yeah. But if a community says, you know what, we're trying to design a main street that's about social experiences. So we want a farmer's market every Saturday. We want strong, locally produced food, not just agriculture, but locally produced food to draw in that market. We're going to have entertainment on Saturday night on Main Street. And we want more bars and more brew pubs and more restaurants. And that's where we're going to start. We're not worried about the housing right now. We're not worried. That's where we're going to start because we are 20 minutes from a major city, and we think we're even going to invest what we have into buses to bring people out here because we want to be do something unique, and this is going to draw money into the community. And you know what? Great. Then I'll look and say, well, then I'll invest in a brew pub instead of, this. You got to quit trying to be everything and be something on purpose, and then you'll find the right partners. It's like sorry, I get really passionate about this.
Which is good because it's good because if you were just saying one word responses to me, it would not be a good podcast. So this is perfect.
I have farmers and ranchers, agricultural producers say, you know what, Doug, we can't get into China. We're having a really tough time getting our product in there. And I tell them the reason why is because this requires federal to federal government negotiations about how much wheat is going to get into the country. Why not look at what unique products you might make? And there was one place, I mean, they have a small local guy that grinds red fife wheat into flour. It's a very rare wheat, and it is the perfect wheat. It's what they used to use for flour. It's sweeter, and it's all organic. I said, what if you just found one other community that wants that red fife wheat in China? You know, that's where you're going to grow. And you're trying to do everything, and you just need to start with one thing really well.
Okay.
For instance, I mean, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Anyone go look it up.
I know Lancaster quite well.
Do you?
I've been to Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Really? Oh, you know what? I was in Ontario speaking, and there was a lady who was originally from there, and I said Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because that's the way we pronounce it, Burt Lancaster, right?
Yep.
And she looked at me and said, no, it's Lancaster.
Do you mind me asking what community you were talking to, or do you remember where she was, like, what community she was from?
It was outside of Windsor.
Okay, then never mind. Just because the family that I knew from Lancaster was from Cobourg area in Ontario, so that's why it was small world if it was the same person.
Yeah, no. Oh, well, that maybe I'll have to look it up. I mean, I speak all over North America, so.
But anyway, your story about Lancaster. Lancaster.
Yeah, Lancaster. It's so the story, to sum it up really short, and of course there's going to be some nuances I miss, but essentially they're in the Rust Belt, and they lost a significant part of their industry with the Rust Belt, right? I mean, it's hard pressed, no steel manufacturing, it was on the decline. So what happened is that all the young people left because there were no traditional jobs in those plants and factories. And so their population declined and their economy shrunk. They sat around and said, what are we going to do? And I like it because in emergency situations, I always tell people, work the problem. Just don't try and fix everything. Just fix one thing. And they said, well, we've got a seniors population because, of course, they're not looking for jobs. So let's focus on them. So they focused on, housability, housing affordability, jobs, quality of life. There were 6 indices that they used to focus on. And did things like instead of bike paths, they had golf cart paths so that seniors could move around. They took some of the unemployed young people in their schools, and they created a bit of a program to partner them up so that grocery stores could deliver groceries, to those seniors. I think it was one of the first, grocery store pickup initiatives in North America. They did things to help seniors. They enhanced their pickleball courts. I think they were one of the first places that said pickleball is a big thing. And seniors loved it. They felt like they were being serviced and catered to, and that their interests were important and their needs were being met. And that was it. I mean, they didn't market it or advertise it. They didn't anticipate seniors would move there for it. They just thought, let's focus on what we can control. And they actually had some pushback from people that said, oh, you don't care about young people. You don't care about entrepreneurs. You don't care about young families. And they got chastised for it. But what happened was that those seniors who were happy in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, went other places in the winter, like Arizona and Florida and California, for the cold months to stay warm. And they bragged about Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and the quality of life that was there and what the community did. And to other seniors who said, well, why the hell do we live where we are? Because they don't give a damn about us. And in the summer months, they would move to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Their population went up, young people moved. And now if you want to build any kind of seniors housing, go to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because every type of development and every major seniors housing builder is in Lancaster. Their main street's been improved. They beautified it. And now they have one of the fastest growing young professional associations in the Midwest.
Wow.
in the Rust Belt, because young people are moving back because there's money to be made with a growing seniors population, new development.
So,
And so that's why I
okay.
tell people, focus on one thing and do it really well. Don't be everything.
So by that logic, by what you've just said, it sounds like you're advocating to focus more on seniors than youth, because more rural communities right now are dwindling. Their population sizes are shrinking because more families are moving away to the large urban centers. Like they said, the one community up north, their biggest issue is resident retention and keeping them here. In your book, do you talk about how do you keep the young family, the youth of the community there in the small rural communities, and also keep the seniors there? Because seniors will want to stay where they were born, where they were raised, so they will want to stay in their home community, where more youth will want to leave. So how do you retain the youth to make sure they come back after schooling?
Yeah, that's the key difference. Is you don't try and retain them and keep them, but give them a reason to come home after, and don't even just give them a reason to come home after. Give a reason for any youth to move there. I mean, again, I'm going to go back to the subdivisions. It's a challenge because most of these communities want to build a subdivision, and whether they get a developer or not, they build a subdivision with a, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage in the subdivision. Well, those young people, they go off, they go to school. If they want to come home, where are they going to live? Most of them don't want a bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage, and if they do, they can't afford it anyway. So then, while they're gone, still developing skills, getting educated, they meet someone. And then they settle down, and they do find a job, but they're still just getting started, so they can't afford the 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage. So they pick a community, a suburb outside some urban center, or some where they can afford the housing, or there's something different where they live downtown in a 2-bedroom condo, and then they get established and settled. Why would they move back to your town?
Well,
Unless they're an entrepreneur and going to start a business.
well, that too.
There's no housing. Sorry, you're cutting out.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. No, well, I'm a big advocate for building up instead of out. I think apartment buildings will attract more people who can't afford the 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom garage house, because right now house prices are still going up, even though the economy is not doing well. So do communities have to look at alternative housing to attract residents and keep youth here as well?
Hell yes. They need a diversity of housing, and it's not just for young people. It's for, seniors that don't want to do house maintenance and mow the lawn and shovel the snow anymore, and they're looking for something a little more, 2-bedroom condo that they can lock the door and it's still safe and secure when they go somewhere else for 3 months or 4 months. You don't get a diversified economy and a diversified population without diversified housing. So we need to diversify our housing, and even where we locate it.
So
but we also
go ahead.
We also, like, and I if someone listens to this, they might be upset, but there's a community, a region that had this program called Return to Rural, and it's noble, and it was really good when it started, except it's got 2 challenges now. The notion that in order to live in a community in a rural area, to go back to your small town, you have to be from there, right? It's return to rural, when there are lots of people who would like to live in a neighborhood in a community that aren't from there. Okay, 1. And 2, it's sort of the mindset. Their whole plan was, if we could just get 1 out of every 10 to come back. That is not a growth strategy. That is a slow death strategy. What you should be communicating, and it's why I tell people not to use these words. Don't use rural, don't use small town feel, and don't use agriculture. Because rural gives the impression that, you're next door to smelly cows, which isn't the case, right? But think about it. You're communicating to people who live in urban centers who want a real community. So you say a small town feel. Well, to lots of them, the small town feel sounds like, yeah, there's a barren main street and there's no businesses, none of the stuff that I want. When there are a lot of amenities and services small communities have that most people in larger centers aren't aware of, right? They just presume there's nothing there. So when you say small town feel, all you're selling is that everyone knows everybody else, and there's not, traffic volumes at 8 and 4, but you're not telling them what you have. You're telling them what you don't. And same with agriculture. I mean, there's an entire generation that when we use the word agriculture, we give them the impression that, it's hard, backbreaking labor, and you have to be a big, strong guy to do it, and it's laborious, and it's taxing, and it's dirty. We should be talking about food production, which in this day and age is not a backbreaking enterprise. You need a technology degree, a marketing degree, an engineering degree, an agriculture degree, and an economics degree, because it is so. It's one of the most complex and international businesses you can do. We use old language that worked really well in the 30s and sell something that people aren't buying. So I tell people instead, use the phrase neighborhood instead of small town feel. There are neighborhoods in every region, and neighborhood says you belong and that there's stuff there you can live in that neighborhood almost independent of everything else. Use, instead of rural, say community, because what I mean, it's all in the marketing. And instead of agriculture, use food production, because it's a different mindset. And our language determines how we think about things. So if we're going to be successful in communities, we need to change our language.
The biggest concern that I hear from the Reeves that I talk to and the counselors that I talk to is it worked so well 20 years ago, so we should just bring it back and try it again. With everything going on in the world right now, with oil prices slumping, with the economy slowing down, that's not working. What worked in the 90s and 80s is not going to work in 2020, 2010. So how do you, as a speaker, as an author, as an advocate for communities, try to convince counselors, Reeves, economic development officers to stop thinking in the past and start thinking in the future?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That is, because I want to clarify right now that what worked in the in the 80s and the 90s and even up to 2010 isn't working now, and it was never going to, despite the price of oil. In fact, major events have caused changes in society that have become permanent. World War II meant men went off to war primarily, and women had to go work in the factories. And then women realized, hey, this isn't men's work, this is anybody's work, and I could do this. Ta-da! Thank God that changed, and it became permanent. This pandemic is not changing the world, though. This pandemic is speeding up the changes that were inevitable. People are realizing how important it is to be part of a community for our security and our safety, but they're also learning the value of going online so you can buy anything anywhere. But now we need our communities to layer both, be online and have an authentic community, because otherwise they go online. We told businesses all the time, you need to have a presence online and make people know you're there. Well, now when you can't go out and you can't go into a store to shop, you go online and you find Amazon. You should have been online already and had people know you were there, but at least now you know. Yeah. So this crisis is forcing them to think differently. But honestly, the best I could do, I created a presentation called Everything's About to Change, and it's the foundation for the next book, which is called The Re-Rise of Rural America. And it's really about how economics, demographics, technology, values are all shifting, and the opportunity for communities to capitalize on those. So I do the presentations all over North America. About 40%, I would say, 4 out of 10 communities say, I like that. Tell us more. So we do a call, and then they go, whoa, that means I have to change. And about maybe 1 in 10 are willing to step forward. I don't spend a lot of time trying to convince the other 9 out of 10 communities to change, because if they don't see it, I don't know that there's anything I can do to make them. You can't. They have to want to adapt. So, and I'm busy enough with the 1 out of 10 that wants to be prepared for the future.
So, one of the big things that I look for when I move to a community, I did it when I moved to Lloydminster, I did it when I moved to Slave Lake, was I looked at their online presence. And in the last 5-6 years, the online presence of Facebook has been prominent in communities across this country, and I'm assuming around the world. But in the smaller rural communities, every single one of them, it seems, has a community discussion page, which is moderated by residents. And it is and I'm not a big fan of social media. I have to use it, but I'm not a fan of it. I will say that the pool of disgusting comments that I read on Facebook on those discussion pages can deter people from moving. How do you attract people, but also ensure that they don't look at those Facebook pages? Because I will be the first to admit, I had an option to move to Lloydminster in another community, which I will not say where, but I chose Lloydminster because their online presence was a little bit more friendlier than the other communities. So how do communities, especially rural communities, stop those without trying to hammer free speech?
I don't know that you can. I mean, look, they have those Facebook, what are they, darts and diamonds, and they have some sort of like praise and criticism, and and most of them are cesspools of negativity and criticism. And we were in one community, I swear it was the most negative place I have ever been in my life. You couldn't say a positive thing without 100 people piling on and being critical. And so we went in there to do a strategic economic plan for them, and then we had the town hall where we presented what made them unique and where they were going to go, and it was so critical. And I knew it was going to be critical, so I told council, you don't say anything. I'm going to take all of the criticism. But it was a straight hour of nothing but anger and, well, she did something in 1922, and it's like, does that matter for your future? And it took an hour before they all sat down, the negative folks, and there were, normally they're about 3% of the population. In this case, they were about 30%, and then they started to talk more positively, and then they left. And I mean, the negativity swelled back up. You can't. A community. My point is, a community needs to realize, people need to realize that if a community is negative and self-infecting, there's not a lot you can do to change it. There's a lot you can do to prevent it from building, which is, we teach communication strategies that are focused on inoculating people against the negativity. It's like a vaccine, but you have to deliberately get ahead of it. You can't wait until the criticism piles up or it just keeps piling up, and pretty soon people are bitter and angry and nothing will be good, and it's too late. But you can work on meaningful communication that inoculates people against that negativity. But once it's done, once it's like that, if I, like you said, avoid the place. I wouldn't encourage anyone to invest there. And as the irony is that anyone who hears this will say, well, you're just saying my community's give up on it. It's not me that gave up on it. It's the people that are continuously negative that are creating the mindset, and it's because they've already given up. It's up to them to decide they want to change their mind or not anybody else's.
That's a good point. The one last area I want to talk about before we wrap up here is cooperation. It is a key part of your book. Do you advocate for more regional government style?
Yes. Yeah. It was probably my biggest challenge when I was minister in municipal affairs, and the biggest criticism I got, because a lot of municipalities, I don't care if they're mad, I've said it before, the municipality operates in a way where those elected officials or the CAO or administration, it becomes their job and their life, and they don't want to cooperate because it means giving up some authority and some responsibility. And so they build this up like it's their municipality is some sort of little kingdom or fiefdom. They're meant to defend against the enemy, and really it's about protecting their own job or their own egos. And yet most communities all across North America, don't have the money to invest in marketing. They don't have the money to invest in proper strategic planning. They don't have the money to invest in redoing their downtown or to create a corporation or to build the housing or to do all the things they need. So yet if they pull together all these independent communities, they're not going to lose their own identity. In fact, what makes them unique in a region is what makes the whole region more competitive. I mean, in the Edmonton Capital Region, all the Sherwood Park and the Strathcona County and the St. Albert and the Fort Saskatchewans and the Ledukes and every community is different. And when they partner together and attract businesses and industry and people to the region, they'll move to different communities. But it's the power of the region together that makes it competitive and still allows each community to be independent and unique. And so it works. But here we have, a lot of communities that have no resources to do anything, and they're dying. One of the biggest success stories I had when I was a minister was a community that was no longer viable, and they finally agreed to dissolve. They had been fighting with the county forever. The two hated each other. When they finally dissolved and they became part of the county, and I mean the citizens in the county and the village refused to work together. When that village finally dissolved and became a hamlet and they became one municipal entity, suddenly they started working together, and there's a new subdivision going in built by a developer who showed up and said, this is a great community, but when you were fighting, there was no hope. So, I mean, we've got to break down these barriers. The enemy, in fact, I have a presentation called I've Seen the Enemy, and it's my mom, because I was at a presentation for a county and a town about working together for economic growth and marketing strategies. And a guy from the county stood up and said, I will not work with people from town who want more money so they can build more sidewalks and they can build more lights and they can support their swimming pool. They're the enemy, Doug. They are not our friends. And another guy from the town stood up and pointed at him and said, but doesn't your mom live in town? So I've seen the enemy, and it's my mom.
So what about cooperations between municipalities, communities, and First Nations? Especially in the north, that is a big area where there's a lot of First Nations communities and there's a lot of communities. How do you advocate to work with that? Is it the same as working with anyone else, or is there a little bit more different? Because First Nations, they want to honor their history, they want to honor their traditions. So how do communities work with that by honoring their traditions and their past?
Yeah, I don't think it's any different. It takes a better understanding. But look, you've got two communities that decide they want to work together. They each have a unique competitive advantage, and it's the complement that makes them stronger together. It's the same with Indigenous communities of all stripes. They have a very unique history and a unique way of approaching the environment and economics in the world. That is a competitive advantage where partnering together can enhance both partners or three partners or four partners. So approaching it is just one of mutual respect, just like you would any other group, understanding what makes them unique and approaching it in a way that what makes them unique is a strength they have that can enhance your strengths. You can complement each other. So, I mean, a lot of us don't necessarily know how to approach it. I would suggest you just approach it like you would any other group, mutual respect and understanding, and find ways that you can maintain your uniqueness and grow and be stronger together. And our Indigenous communities are incredible for the perspectives that they bring to our community. There is a lot that our world needs right now from them, and I encourage the partnerships. I actually don't think we'll find nearly as much success without partnering with our Indigenous communities.
So, last set of questions is around, where did this idea come from for you? Where did 13 Ways come from?
So
should have been the first question, but
No. It's funny. I wrote that rural development strategy and got frustrated with traveling and telling communities all the things they needed to do to be successful, and sitting there watching them do things that was the opposite of what they needed to do. So they'd say, yes, Doug, we want to attract young people. But they'd sit around right in the middle of the conversation about attracting young people and say things like, well, there's no hope here. You got to move to the city if you want success. Young people can't make a go of it here. Stop being so negative. So I wrote a quick list of 10 things on my way to do a presentation, and did a 20-minute presentation on where I thought communities were sabotaging their success. And then I came up with more ideas, and then, continued to add. And I think I got to 16 ways to kill your community. And some of them got put together, and eventually it landed on 13. And one day somebody looked at me and went, "Ooh, that's cool. 13 ways to kill your community. 13's an unlucky number. That's perfect. Great marketing." And I thought, yeah, that's what I planned.
Well, I thought it was because you were an MLA for 13 years. That's why you came up with it. So that's my thought.
Well, I'm not a numerologist, but ironically, 13 has always been a number in our family. My birthday's on the 26th. My wife's birthday's on the 26th. Our first house together was number 26. That's 2. I did have 13 years as an MLA. It just happened to work when there was the floor crossing that it was 13 years. It was, almost like it was fated to be. So the first book, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community, came out in 2010 before I retired from politics. So, and I didn't retire because it was 13 years. It was just the right time to go. It just seems to be a number that works into our lives.
And now, you did mention it beforehand. I didn't realize this, but you are writing a second book now.
Yeah.
When can we expect it on the bookshelves?
Oh, it'll probably be another year. I have some U.S. Publishers that are interested in it, and I prefer to self-publish, but they keep saying they're going to make me an offer I can't refuse. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but and then of course they have a process. I have to finish writing it. So the book is actually called Renaissance or Revolution, and revolution is crossed out, and then it's the re-rise of rural America. And the reason why is because I think there's the difference in rural communities around North America is between to revolution. A lot want a revolution, which is about getting angry and taking something back, going back to the 80s, going back to the 90s, bringing back coal. Yay, this is what we're going to do. Except the world's evolving, and your success isn't going to come from a revolution because nothing was stolen from you. It's just changing. And Renaissance is about an enlightenment and a new opportunity and a golden age. And I think that's what's coming to rural communities if they want to embrace the change and take advantage of the new opportunities. So running through their book process, I'm assuming it's probably a year before it comes out. But there's sub-columns and the presentation I do that people can access if they want to see what's coming.
And they can buy your current book where?
Everywhere. Amazon will sell it to you, but
I will say it will take 5 weeks to get to you, because right now I ordered your book 2 weeks ago and I still haven't gotten it.
Oh, well, you know what? They have their policy is that they will order a bunch of books and then they will sell them, and then they'll order 20 and they'll send you back 10 the next month, and then order 30 more. And they're so confusing, and you wind up, they want their money back if they don't sell them. Well, they're ordering more. They're a monstrosity to deal with. So I told them, you buy them at cash and you keep them or don't. And so they refuse to do it. So I tell everyone on our website, you can buy them, and I'll even autograph them and sign them if you want, and get them to you. If you want, just drop me your email after and I'll send you a couple.
For sure. That's great. Doug, I want to thank you very much for doing this. Greatly appreciate it. I'm more enlightened. I have more questions that I will be able to ask municipalities when I talk to their mayors, their reeves, and their councillors now. So thank you very much for doing this.
Well, thank you, Chris. This is one of the best interviews I've ever had, because we really got into some meat and potatoes, and I love being challenged. It's great. Community building is the most important job on earth, because if we have strong communities, we have successful leadership and profitable businesses, and families can take care of themselves and each other. So thanks for covering this subject.
Okay, you just enlightened me on a new question. Do you think we have strong communities right now?
I think we have some. The
ones that you talk to, are they strong, or are they trying to be strong but not getting there?
Like I said before, so they want to be strong. The question is whether or not they're willing to make the commitment and be different, and do something, because it's not for the faint of heart. It's not an easy fix, and it is not a prescriptive fix either. It's not like, hey, just tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. Anyone who puts, people do it all the time, the 5 steps to building a successful community. It's like, come on, it's more complex than that, and that's not going to deal with finding what makes you unique and creating that value proposition that's going to attract people, business, and industry. So it takes work. It takes time. It's also not going to happen overnight. I mean, it's not like, oh, some federal program comes along and communities will be successful. If you think this is going to happen overnight, you're wrong. So it takes time. It takes energy. It takes commitment. It takes ingenuity. And it takes a desire to be successful and to suffer through failures. And there aren't, as many communities willing to do that as I would like, but I continue to hope we'll get there.
That's a perfect spot to leave it at. Thank you very much, Doug, for doing this. Greatly appreciated. Have yourself an excellent rest of the day and enjoy your weekend and enjoy the treadmill.
Thanks, Chris. Stay safe and stay well.
Perfect. Thanks.
You bet.